You ever have a night where everything seems perfect until it's not? Like you're riding this high, thinking life is finally cutting you a break, and then, bam, reality sucker punches you in the gut? Yeah, that was the night of the company party. I remember the hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the buzz of laughter that filled the air. It was one of those fancy corporate events designed to make everyone forget that come Monday morning, we'd be back under fluorescent lights buried in deadlines. But for tonight, it was like we'd all slipped into someone else's life, a better one, where the champagne flowed endlessly and every room glimmered with the glow of chandeliers. My wife, Melissa, stood out like a star in a crowded sky. She had on this sleek black dress that hugged her in all the right places, with a slit high enough to make me forget how to breathe. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and that smile of hers, the one that had me hooked since college, lit up the room. I couldn't help but admire how easily she fit into this scene, mingling with my coworkers, laughing at their jokes, her hand occasionally resting on my arm like we were the power couple everyone wanted to be. But here's the thing about moments like these. They can blind you. They make you think you're untouchable, that nothing could possibly go wrong. And that's exactly where I was when the first crack appeared. It started small. We were in the middle of a conversation with one of my colleagues when Melissa leaned in and whispered, "I'm just going to the ladies' room. Be back soon." I nodded, barely paying attention, but as the minutes ticked by, I realized she hadn't returned. I scanned the room, expecting to see her chatting with someone near the bar or maybe caught up in a conversation with one of the other spouses. But she wasn't there. My stomach twisted, but I told myself to relax. Maybe there was a line for the restroom, or she'd bumped into an old friend. No big deal, right? But then, as I wandered toward the back of the venue, I caught sight of her. She was stepping out of a side room, and she wasn't alone. Beside her stood my boss, Jason Montgomery, the man who had the power to make or break careers with a single email. They were laughing about something, and for a moment I told myself it was innocent. Maybe they'd just been discussing work, or maybe Jason had one too many drinks and was telling his usual bad jokes. But the way Melissa tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way Jason's hand brushed her arm as they parted, it didn't sit right with me. I froze, my eyes locked on them as she adjusted the strap of her dress and smoothed down her hair. It was a small gesture, but something about it felt too deliberate, like she was trying to compose herself. When she finally noticed me standing there, her expression didn't change. No guilt, no panic, just that same confident smile. "There you are," she said, slipping her arm around mine as if nothing had happened. "I was just talking to Jason about the new project you're on." I forced a smile, my heart pounding in my chest. "Everything okay?" "Of course." She laughed lightly. "Why wouldn't it be?" I didn't have an answer, but the unease gnawed at me all the way home. The car ride was quiet, except for the hum of the tires on the asphalt. Melissa tapped away on her phone, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. I wanted to ask her about Jason, what exactly they were talking about, why they'd been in that room together. But I didn't. Maybe it was cowardice, or maybe it was the fear of hearing an answer I wasn't ready for. Instead, I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and kept my eyes on the road. When we got home, she kicked off her heels and headed straight for the bedroom. "I'm exhausted," she said, yawning as she disappeared down the hallway. I stood there, for a moment, staring after her. The house was dark except for the soft glow from the kitchen light, and the silence felt heavier than usual. My mind replayed the image of her and Jason over and over again, dissecting every second, every glance, every touch. But I couldn't bring myself to confront her. So, I did what I always do. I buried it. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, deadlines, and late nights at the office. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Melissa was the same loving wife she'd always been, making dinner, asking about my day, laughing at my stupid jokes. But beneath it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. And then, just when I was starting to convince myself that I was being paranoid, It happened. I got called into Jason's office one afternoon. He sat behind his massive oak desk, a grin spreading across his face as he slid a folder across to me. "Congratulations," he said. "You've earned it." I opened the folder to see a letter confirming my promotion, senior project manager. A hefty raise, a bigger office, more responsibility. I should have been ecstatic. I should have been calling Melissa to tell her the good news, but instead all I could think about was that night at the party and the conversation she'd had with Jason. When I got home, Melissa was waiting for me at the door, a bottle of champagne in her hand and that radiant smile on her face. "I knew it!" she squealed, throwing her arms around my neck. "I'm so proud of you!" For a moment, I let myself believe her. I let her pull me into the kitchen, where she popped the bottle and poured us each a glass. We toasted to my success. And for a while, everything felt right again. But then, as we sat on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, she said something that made my blood run cold. "You know," she murmured, tracing circles on my arm, "this promotion isn't just about you. I've been supporting you every step of the way, creating a home where you can focus on your work, being your rock when things got tough. It's as much my victory as it is yours." Her words should have been comforting, but instead, they felt like a dagger twisting in my gut. There was something off in the way she said it, like she wasn't just talking about emotional support, but something more, something tangible. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of her soft breathing next to me only making the knot in my chest tighter. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong, and I was going to find out what. They say intuition is your subconscious picking up on things your brain hasn't processed yet. And if that's true, mine had been screaming at me for weeks. I just wasn't ready to listen. But there comes a point where ignoring it isn't an option anymore, where the truth starts knocking so loudly that you can't pretend you don't hear it. For me, that moment began the morning after my promotion celebration. Melissa was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she flipped pancakes. The smell of syrup and freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but instead of feeling comforted by the familiar scene, I felt on edge. It was the little things. How she'd been so quick to open that champagne last night, the way she kept emphasizing that we earned this promotion, as if it wasn't just my hard work but something she helped orchestrate. "Morning," I said, sliding into one of the chairs at the kitchen island. "Morning, babe." She smiled over her shoulder, golden hair catching the morning light. "How'd you sleep?" I could have told her the truth, that I'd spent half the night wide awake, thinking about her and Jason, replaying that night at the party over and over in my head, but instead I shrugged. "Fine." She placed a plate of pancakes in front of me, her hand lingering on my shoulder for a second longer than usual. "You deserve this, you know. Everything good that's coming your way, you've worked so hard for it." I stabbed at the stack with my fork, the syrup suddenly tasting too sweet. "Yeah, I guess." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why do you sound like you don't believe it?" I forced a laugh. "I do. Just still processing it, I guess." She didn't push further, but the way she looked at me lingered, like she knew more than she was letting on. Over the next few days, my paranoia only grew. Melissa seemed different. Not in any obvious way, but in the subtle shifts that only someone who's been married for years would notice. She was more confident, walking around with an air of satisfaction like she knew a secret I didn't. Her spending habits changed too. Suddenly, she was buying designer handbags and booking spa days without consulting me, something she'd never done before. It wasn't that we couldn't afford it now with my raise. It was the why that bothered me. What was she celebrating so much? My promotion or something else entirely? The worst part was that she'd become harder to talk to. Any time I tried to bring up something serious, she'd deflect with a joke or change the subject. And when I mentioned Jason in passing, just to see her reaction, she barely blinked. "Jason's been pretty supportive lately," I said one evening as we sat on the couch, the glow of the TV casting shadows across the room. She sipped her wine and shrugged. He's a good boss. You're lucky to have him. Lucky. The word felt like poison on my tongue. It was a Friday night when things really started to spiral. I'd gone out for drinks with a few coworkers to celebrate the end of a brutal work week. The bar was crowded, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter creating a backdrop of chaos that felt fitting for my mental state. I nursed my beer, barely, paying attention to the conversation around me until one of the guys, Eric, leaned in with a smirk. "Hey, man, I gotta hand it to you. You've got it all figured out." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Your promotion," he said, his words slurring slightly from the alcohol. "Most of us have to bust our asses for years to get noticed, but you've got the secret weapon." I stiffened. "Secret weapon?" He chuckled, leaning closer like he was about to share a dirty little secret. "Come on, don't act like you don't know. Melissa talked to Jason before your promotion, didn't she?" My heart stopped. I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. "What are you talking about?" He waved his hand lazily, as if it were common knowledge. "A couple of us saw her chatting him up at the party. They were pretty cozy, you know, and then boom, next thing we know, you're getting promoted. Guess she knows how to push the right buttons, huh?" The room spun. I excused myself, mumbling something about needing fresh air, and stumbled out of the bar. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to clear my head. Melissa, Jason, the promotion. It all clicked into place like a puzzle I'd been too blind to see. The night at the party, her newfound confidence, her insistence that this success was ours. She hadn't been supporting me from the sidelines. She'd been making deals behind my back. But what kind of deal? How far had she gone to secure my promotion? I didn't want to think about it. But the images came anyway. Her and Jason alone in that room, her adjusting the strap of her dress, the way his hand had lingered on her arm. I felt sick. When I got home, the house was dark. Melissa was already in bed, her soft breathing the only sound cutting through the silence. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a moment, watching her sleep, and for the first time in our marriage, I didn't feel comforted by her presence. I felt like I didn't know her at all. I spent the next day searching for answers. I checked her phone when she was in the shower, but it was clean, too clean. No messages from Jason, no suspicious texts. It was like she'd anticipated that I might look. But then I remembered her old laptop, the one she barely used anymore. She kept it in the office, gathering dust on the shelf. My hands shook as I powered it on and waited for it to boot up. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There, buried in a folder labeled Personal, were messages between her and Jason. They weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The tone was enough. Inside jokes, late-night chats about work that had nothing to do with work, and one message that sent my blood boiling. "Thanks for last night. You always know how to make things happen." I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. There it was, proof that something had been going on between them. That evening, I couldn't look at her the same way. Every word she said felt like a lie. Every touch felt like a betrayal. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw the laptop in her face and demand an explanation. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the part of me that still clung to the hope that this wasn't what it seemed. But deep down, I knew better. I spent the night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, the weight of what I'd found pressing down on my chest like a boulder. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't live like this, drowning in suspicion, suffocating under the weight of her lies. It was time to get answers, real ones. And this time, I wasn't going to let her wiggle out of it. There's a certain kind of numbness that takes over when you know your life is about to change forever. I felt it the next morning as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee. I had no intention of drinking. The laptop, with her messages to Jason, sat closed in front of me like a loaded gun. Melissa was in the bedroom, singing softly to herself as she got ready for the day. It was the kind of normal domestic scene that should have felt comforting, but instead, it felt surreal, like I was watching the ghost of a life that had already slipped away. I took a deep breath, gripping the sides of the table to keep my hands steady. This is it, I told myself. No more guessing. No more running from the truth. When she walked into the kitchen, her hair still damp from the shower, she smiled at me like it was just another day. "Good morning," she said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. Her lips were warm, but all I could feel was cold. "Sit down," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She blinked, the smile faltering for just a second before she recovered. "What's with the serious tone? Did something happen at work?" I pushed the laptop toward her. "Open it." Her hand hovered over the lid, hesitation flickering across her face. "What is this?" "Open it, Melissa." The room fell silent except for the sound of her breathing, which had grown shallow and rapid. Slowly, she lifted the lid and the screen lit up, displaying the last message she'd sent to Jason. Her eyes scanned the words, and I watched as the color drained from her face. "I can explain," she said, her voice cracking. I laughed bitterly. "I bet you can." She closed the laptop and looked at me, tears already welling up in her eyes. "It's not what you think." "Don't do that," I snapped, my voice rising. "Don't sit there and insult my intelligence. I know what this is, Melissa. I know you've been sleeping with him." She flinched like I'd struck her. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "I swear to God I didn't." "But it did," I said, the words tasting like poison. "How long?" She wiped at her eyes, her mascara smudging in the process. "A few months. A few months." My mind reeled, trying to piece together the timeline, the party, the promotion, the nights she'd come home late, claiming she was out with friends, or stuck running errands. It all fit too perfectly, like a puzzle I didn't want to solve but couldn't ignore. I stood up, pacing the kitchen as anger bubbled beneath the surface. "So what was it, Melissa? A business arrangement? You sleep with my boss and he makes sure I climb the corporate ladder?" "No!" she cried, standing up and grabbing my arm. "It wasn't like that. I wasn't trying to use you, I swear. It got out of control." I yanked my arm away, the sting of her touch lingering. "Got out of control?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "That's your excuse?" she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I did it for us, for the kids. I thought if you got the promotion, we'd have a better life. More stability, more opportunities. Don't you dare bring the kids into this," I growled, cutting her off. "You didn't do this for them. You did it for yourself." She sank back into the chair, her body trembling as she cried. I wanted to feel something other than rage, maybe pity or understanding, but I couldn't. All I could see was the image of her and Jason, their bodies tangled in sheets, her whispering the same sweet nothings to him that she used to whisper to me. I leaned against the counter, running a hand through my hair as I tried to collect my thoughts. "How could you do this, Melissa? How could you look me in the eye every day and act like everything was fine?" "I didn't want to lose you," she choked out. "I thought if I kept it hidden, we could just move on, and you'd never have to know." "But I do know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And now we can't go back." She looked up at me, desperation etched into her features. "Please, we can fix this. I'll end it with Jason. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "You think this is something you can just fix? Like patching a hole in the wall?" Her sobs grew, louder, and for a moment I just stood there, watching the woman I thought I knew fall apart in front of me. I don't remember packing my bag. One minute I was standing in the kitchen, and the next I was upstairs throwing clothes into a duffel. My mind was blank, operating on autopilot as I grabbed whatever I could find. Melissa followed me up the stairs, begging me to stay. She clung to my arm, her tears soaking into my shirt as she pleaded with me to give her another chance. "You're my husband," she sobbed. "We've built a life together. Don't throw it all away." I paused, looking down at her tear-streaked face. For a split second, I almost gave in. I almost convinced myself that we could rebuild what she'd broken. that forgiveness was possible. But then I remembered the messages, the lies, the nights she spent in another man's arms. I gently pried her fingers off my arm and slung the duffel over my shoulder. You threw it away the moment you decided he was worth more than your marriage. Her sobs echoed down the hallway as I walked out the door. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, awkward conversations with lawyers, and sleepless nights in a rented apartment. Melissa texted me constantly, leaving voicemails begging me to come home, but I didn't respond. What was there to say? The divorce proceedings were as messy as I expected them to be. She cried in the lawyer's office, apologizing over and over, again, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. My heart had already shattered, and there was no putting it back together. The kids didn't understand at first. They thought I was just staying somewhere else for work, and I didn't have the heart to tell them the truth, but eventually they'd find out. Eventually they'd realize that the foundation of their family had cracked beyond repair. It's been 6 months since that morning in the kitchen. I finalized the divorce a month ago, and I've been trying to rebuild my life ever since. Some days are better than others. Some days I wake up and feel like I can breathe again. Other days I'm drowning in memories of what used to be. I heard through the grapevine that Jason was quietly let go from the company. Apparently, someone tipped off HR about his inappropriate relationships, and they decided to handle it discreetly. I don't know if Melissa's involvement ever went public, and honestly, I don't care. People ask me if I regret leaving her, if I ever think about giving her a second chance. The truth is, I do think about it. But then I remember the betrayal. The way she looked me in the eye and lied. The way she justified her actions as if they were noble. She didn't just cheat on me with Jason. She cheated on the life we built, together on the future I thought we had. And that's the part that hurts the most. Because in the end, it wasn't just my wife who betrayed me. It was the woman I thought I could trust with everything. And once that trust is gone, there's no getting it back. Not for us, not ever.